Rob. And I think before I do the introduction, I'd like to recognize Rob and Betty Abraham. They really, truly run the Propeller Club here in Cleveland. Any of the officers are just figureheads. Rob told me that a couple weeks ago we had a dozen people that were signed up for this lunch. And so Rob and Betty got on the phone and reminded people to come out. So I think without their hard work, I don't think we exist. They've really done a great job. So let's give Rob and Betty a round. So as Rob said, we have Captain Edward L. Bartlett Jr. with us today. You may have read about Captain Bartlett's plans in the news about, you've heard a little bit about submarines in Lorraine, and hopefully he'll tell us a little bit about that. Before I introduce him, I just want to point out he has a few folks that he works with that are here with him. Jacqueline O'Brien, who's seated just to his left, she's the Vice President of Corporate Development, a Cleveland native who comes to us most recently from the Seattle area where she worked at Vigor Industries, the shipyards out there. And then Rod Thompson, who's seated two more to the left. He is the CFO of Captain Bartlett's company. Previously, many of you may have encountered him as a financier at PNC Bank, and his father worked for O.B. Norton for a very long time in the maritime industry, so many of you may have known his father as well. But our keynote speaker today is Captain Edward L. Bartlett, the founder of Bartlett Maritime Corporation. Captain Bartlett has a long and distinguished career. He sent me a CV that goes on for 3 or 4 pages. I shrunk it down, and I'm sure he can tell you more about some of the great things he's done in his career. But just a couple of the highlights. Graduated from the State University of New York, has a degree in marine engineering, and has an engineer's license. He also went on to obtain a captain's license. He has an MBA from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. He served on active duty in the United States Navy, was deployed on several vessels. He was an instructor at the United States Navy Nuclear Power Training Program, has extensive experience in shipyards, both naval and commercial shipyards. After the Navy, he went to work for General Dynamics Electric Boat as a nuclear construction engineer, supporting the construction of the Los Angeles class and the Ohio class submarines. He was president of a company called DSI Power Systems, which worked on developing and testing magnet ship propulsion motor systems. And now he heads his own businesses, which support the aerospace and defense industries. And so please join me in giving Captain Bartlett a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Tom, for the gracious introduction. I'm pleased to be here today to help the Propeller Club celebrate National Maritime Day for 2022, which was formally, as we noted, on the 22nd. The maritime industry tends to be a family business, as many of you know, and is represented by my own family. Most of my sea time was actually on active duty in the Navy. And as Tom said, I'm licensed in both the deck and engine departments. My brother, however, went exclusively engine. He was Tom Cook was just telling me he was regimental commander at Kings Point way back in the day. My brother was regimental commander at Maine Maritime, and I believe he graduated in the class of '79 and went to work for the Military SEAL Command as a chief engineer, and he served on their most complex vessels until he retired. The oldest of my 3 sons, Ted, like me, went to sea with the Navy, in his case serving on the Navy's first gas turbine-powered ship, the USS Spruance, which is a destroyer. And my youngest son, John, is underway right now, actually, as a civilian mariner with the Military SEAL Command out in the Pacific, serving on a Navy replenishment oiler, a fleet oiler. So it's a big family business for us, as it is for many of you. And for those of you that don't have direct family relationships, it's a very close-knit community, and we certainly celebrate it. Some of you may remember back to the year 2000 when one of the 2 remaining operational Liberty ships from World War II visited the Great Lakes. These ships were the ships, in recognition of Maritime Day, that transported the equipment from the arsenal of democracy that went out to save the world. The ship that came up here was the SS John W. Brown, which is normally berthed in Baltimore. It came up here because it needed some hull rivets replaced. And at the time, because of the long life of our ships up here in the lakes, we had probably the only shipyard that was able to do hull rivet replacement. So it came up here on a tour and replaced the rivets in its hull. So I'm proud actually to continue to support the John Brown as a life member of the Project Liberty ship. And if any of you are interested, the Brown actually still sails out of Baltimore. They do these things called living history cruises, which are really marvelous. It's a magnificent, gracious old ship. I mean, it's one of the ugly ducklings of the fleet that were built, you know, in weeks at a time. There were days when they launched 10 or 15 of these ships in one day. But these ships won the war. So the next living history cruise is actually September 24th. And if you're interested, you can go to ssjohnwbrown.org for more information. And they actually sell on tickets for the next cruise through the end of May. So from that look back at World War II and the maritime day roles, we'll talk a little bit about the Cold War and my involvement in submarines. I was part of the Silent Service, and as many of you have heard, it's called the Silent Service for a reason. Our submarines are very quiet, and those of us who've sailed these submarines are very quiet about what we do. None of us talk about exactly what we do on the ships. But I'll tell you that it's not a mistake that the most decorated ship in the history of the United States Navy, the USS Archie, 683, was a Cold War Navy submarine. I never sailed on the Archie, although the ships I did sail on, we did the job too, and we brought back the results. I want to talk very briefly about the last ship I sailed on, the third ship. I was plank owner on a brand new ship, and then went to so-called shore duty, although it wasn't much of a shore duty because we deployed to Italy on my shore duty tour. But my next ship after that was an well-aged ship. It was the USS Gato. It was the last ship of the Thresher class of submarines. When USS Thresher, the 593, was the first ship of what became the Navy's production submarines, was lost on sea trials with 129 people on board on April 10, 1963. I was in third grade, so you wonder why I remember the day. Well, I had a family connection. It's a family business. My uncle worked at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which built the ship and had just recently overhauled it, and it was on sea trials from that very overhaul when it was lost. I remember the day very well. Later I learned we also had a ship from Electric Boat on sea trials that day, the Alexander Hamilton, a missile submarine. And when people heard about the loss of the submarine on sea trials, the people in Connecticut thought they'd lost the Hamilton, although it turned out we'd lost the Thresher. And this had a profound impact on the submarine force, much like the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald in November of 1975 had on the Great Lakes Fleet. It was a horrible day for us. But just to understand the tempo of what was going on during that period when the Thresher was lost. And there's a story about it on our website. It's kind of buried now because it was published last year. But during the period from June 9th, 1959, when we launched our first missile submarine, through the April 1st of 1967, when we commissioned the last of our initial fleet of missile submarines, the so-called 41 for Freedom. The U.S. Navy delivered and commissioned into service a new submarine every 44 days. Every 44 days for 8 years, we built, commissioned, and delivered and commissioned a new submarine into service. It was a torrid pace. During that period, when Thresher was lost in '63, Gator was actually on the building ways of Electric Boat. They were building other newer classes by then, and they were focused on the missile submarines as well. And because they wanted to do the investigation and figure out what, and there were some significant design changes that occurred as a result of the Thresher loss, they took the incomplete Thresher class ships and they actually all launched them all and parked them and just let them sit for a while till they figure out what to do next. So Gato wasn't actually completed and delivered into service until January 1968. And it was actually from another shipyard. It was delivered into service from the Quincy shipyard up in Quincy, Massachusetts. Fore River, for those of you that know the area, Mark's shaking his head, knows the area well. So it was crazy time. So when I served on the Gato, it was 1985, 1986. And at that point, the Gato was a mature ship, was past the midpoint of its life, had already been refueled, it was actually approaching its final scheduled overhaul. We deployed to an area that's, well, the unclassified term for it was the Western Atlantic. But don't think that it was the Western Atlantic. It was an area out of Connecticut. We submerged off Connecticut. We came back to Connecticut. So we were wherever we were, doing whatever we did. We were underway submerged, doing the job, when President Reagan held his first summit with Gorbachev in Geneva. Not the one in Reykjavik, the one in Geneva the year before that, in 1985. It was the peak of the Cold War, and it was a torrid pace, and we were off doing the job. It was a tough run. It was the hardest run I ever did at sea. We called it it was scheduled to be 72 days long. It ended up being 69 days run, 69 days without a port call. So we called it our 69-day run, which is not a particularly the long deployment. It's a long trip without a port call, but it was, it was a fast pace. But because our ship was in what you might call rough shape for a submarine, not only did we have to fight the adversary, we had to fight our own ship. We had a couple of close calls. We had some equipment failures that almost sank the ship. Because of our so-called 594 tough crew, who all knew what they were doing very well. I'm here to talk about it today. And we completed the run, we brought back the goods, and we actually won a meritorious unit commendation for that trip. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, a MUC, or a meritorious unit commendation, is roughly equivalent, but actually higher ranking than a Bronze Star, which is, the MUC is a unit award, the Bronze Star is an individual award. The point though is that we had to fight our own ship's maintenance demons as much as we had to fight the adversary. This experience burned an absolute appreciation into my soul for the importance of maintenance in submarines. Unlike any other vessel, when you're underway submerged, there's not a lot of margin. There's not a lot of margin. You don't have a lot of reserve buoyancy. You have backup systems and whatever else, and you can always hit the chicken switches and try to emergency blow, but there's not a lot of margin. It's to me, it's even more, well, maybe it's because I served on it, but it's a lot more impressive than space travel, to tell you the truth, for me. So fast forward again to the end of the Cold War. I left active duty. I was not on an electric boat, and I was designing the USS Seawolf, which was the Cold War premier submarine. You had everything on it that you could want. And of course, now the Cold War is over, Congress didn't want to buy anymore, and so it became a victim of the peace dividend. Everybody remembers back to the early 90s when our nation said, all right, Cold War's over, we fought it, we won, hooray, we won. Now it's time to collect the peace dividend and pocket it. So what did we do to our Navy? We cut the size of our fleet in half. We scrapped a bunch of naval shipyards, leaving only 4. We retired some very good submarines, 17 of them, that were at midlife, that had a service life possibility of 35, 36 years. We scrapped them halfway through their life instead of refueling them. And we stopped building new submarines. During the 1980s, during the 60s, our industrial base delivered a new submarine every 44 days. During the 80s, our industrial base delivered a new submarine 5 a year. During the 90s, we only built 3 submarines in the entire decade with a peace dividend. the 00s, the aughts, or whatever you want to call them, the 2000s, we started building submarines at one per year. And we were able to do that, recover to that. Since the year 2011, though, for a decade now, we've been trying to build 2 submarines a year, and we still haven't hit that production rate. We've not been able to reliably build 2 submarines a year for over a decade, though we've been trying. So what happened along the way? Well, 9/11 happened. Some of you remember that. Most of you remember that. I was actually down the road at Hopkins Airport when it happened. And of course, I turned around and went home. The Navy's been running just as hard since 9/11 as it ran during the Cold War. As a result, we've got 11 aircraft carriers, and we normally have one of them in its midlife refueling overhaul. The aircraft carriers have a 50-year life. There's a 4-year slot in the middle where they get completely rebuilt and overhauled to get the new reactor cores. Well, normally we're scheduled to have only one of those in refueling overhaul at a time. Right now there are 2. Why? Well, we ran the carriers so hard, we're running out of fuel. And don't think the submarines didn't run just as hard as well. So we've been running our submarines very hard. So the maintenance demand post 9/11 has been very high. And yet we only have 4 naval shipyards to maintain these ships. On the other side of the coin, our adversaries around the world have been watching, listening, and responding as well. Who here knows what nation has the largest Navy right now? Anybody know? It's not the United States. It's China. Since 2015, China's had a bigger Navy than we have. And it's projected to be about twice our size within about 5 years. China, biggest Navy. They're reacting. So that brings us to something called the Davidson window. So Admiral Phil Davidson, who served with my son on the Spruance many years ago, was something called the combatant commander out in what the Department of Defense called Indo-PACOM. It's the Pacific Command, which includes the Indian Ocean. So it's called Indo-PACOM. He testified before Congress a year ago that within 6 years, China would be ready to invade Taiwan. Now think for a minute, some of you remember what happened a year ago or so when the Suez Canal got blocked and all of our international trade goods got stuck in shipment there for about a month when the canal was blocked. Think what would happen to the world if we lost Taiwan and TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, the world's largest manufacturer of semiconductors, chips, wasn't available. TSMC, which is one of the reasons why, right down the road in Columbus area, in New Albany, Intel is investing in a new facility to build chips here in the United States. It's a strategic weakness. But the Davidson window was established a year ago and everybody agreed to it. Earlier this spring, Admiral Charles Richard, who is the commander of what's called Strategic Command, which is responsible for all nuclear weapons in the United States Arsenal, he testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, reaffirming the Davidson window. And he said that China has doubled its nuclear stockpile within 2 years, despite expectations it would take Beijing until the end of the decade to do so. So now we have the Davidson window, the Davidson-Richardson window, or Richard window, excuse me. But it gets even more concerning. Some of you may have heard of the name of Mary Kissel. She was a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board for a while, and then she went into the Department of State, was a senior advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Lately, she's been commenting that in light of what's happened in Ukraine, the Davidson-Richard window is now 2 years left instead of 5. So Mary Kissel's saying, where we had 5 years left, 2027, to expect an invasion of Taiwan, it's now 2 years left to expect an invasion of Taiwan. Kissel's conclusions seem to have been reinforced by current events. 4 Chinese H-6 bombers and 2 Russian Tu-95 bombers conducted joint flights together on Tuesday this week around Japan and the Republic of Korea, prompting both countries to scramble jet fighter aircraft to monitor the flights. Joint flights took place the same day President Biden was meeting with his Australian, Indian, and Japanese quadrupling counterparts in Tokyo. Though both the Russian and Chinese defense ministries stated that the flights were part of their annual military cooperation plan and not directed toward anyone. Sure. So where does this all intersect with my company's plans for the North Coast? Well, in a recent Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, just a couple of weeks ago, the Chief of Naval Operations was asked, what capabilities provided by the Navy are in the greatest demand? His answer unequivocally was, first of all, it's submarines. And he's not a submariner. Okay? You see, while our aircraft carriers and surface ships carry a lethal punch, China's developed a precision missile called the DF-21 that has a longer range than our carrier aircraft. So think about that. So our aircraft carrier can't get within range until it becomes vulnerable to the DF-21, which is launched from land. But the Chinese still can't find our submarines, and they're very fearful of our submarines. They're stealthy, and they carry an exceptionally large lethal punch. But the trouble is, we only have 50 attack submarines, and 20% of them are tied up on overdue or extended maintenance. And we're 3 submarines behind on deliveries of new ships. In other words, since we started buying 2 submarines a year, we should have taken delivery of 3 more than we have. So we're behind on deliveries, and the ones that are in service are stuck in long-term overhauls and maintenance or waiting to go into maintenance beyond the normal schedule. So our fleet is crippled for availability, which, you know, some of you heard about the USS Connecticut, had a grounding last fall out in the Pacific. Well, when you read the report came out this week, and when you read the report, that ship was running exceptionally hard. It was running 70% of its time underway away from home port. We're running ships like that very hard. The ones that are available are getting run very hard because not enough are available. So, with all these ships tied up and with the ships behind, it's just, it doesn't work. So our Bartlett Maritime plan, which is a public-private partnership to reduce the cost of building new facilities primarily, is focused on helping the Navy to both close their maintenance gap and to accelerate the construction of new submarines. On the maintenance side, we plan to build a component repair center over in Lordstown. It's going to be about 1 million square feet. It's going to have about 1,000 employees. And what we'll do is we'll repair components removed from ships that are in dry dock. When a submarine goes, you know, when one of the Great Lakes fleet goes into winter maintenance, you know, you have the winter seasons off up here, so it's easy time to do maintenance. But when a submarine goes into maintenance, the shortest maintenance period is 6 months, but that only happens once in the ship's life near the end. The longer maintenance periods are 18 months to 24 months, deep maintenance. And so a lot of major components are removed from the hull and sent somewhere for the components and the equipment to be overhauled. That somewhere is going to be Lordstown, because the Navy is doing that in the back shops now at the shipyards, and they're short of labor, and they want to have the labor working on the ships. So we'll accelerate the overhaul of the equipment to let the shipyard workers that are in the shipyard install and remove and install the equipment. And because we'll have a rotatable pool of equipment, the component that came out of the ship when it went in may not be the same component that's in it when it goes back out. Another component that's already been rebuilt will be sent back sooner to reduce the number of days on the blocks and get the ship back to sea where it needs to be. On the construction side, we plan to build a modular manufacturing facility over in Lorraine. Be purpose-built to fabricate sub-modules. Now, the way submarines are built changed a lot from the 80s till now. We used to build a hull, cut a hole in the top, and drop stuff in and build it there with the hull complete. Today, we build the hull, and then we slide complete packages in from the ends. And then we weld the hull sections together. So kind of a erector set approach to building these things. And the parts that go inside are these modules. And so the modules we're looking to build are like 300 tons each, which means they have to be shipped by water, and they have to be very precise because they're going into a precision hull. So these will be built over in Lorraine. We'll ship them out through the St. Lawrence Seaway using a proprietary, patent-pending modification or an articulated tug barge that we're going to have built up at Fincantieri, up at Bay Shipbuilding in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. And we'll have thousands of people working over there in Lorraine. They'll be shipped, the modules from our fabrication will be shipped to Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Virginia, where the ships are put together. It's critical for us to get back on track with construction, particularly since the Ohio class, the current missile submarines, the ones that replaced the original 41 for Freedom, are all aging out. We have zero margin left in the schedule to replace it with this new Columbia class. The future USS Columbia, the first ship of that class actually, will have its keel laid next Saturday, June 4th, over in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. So it's already building, but we can't build the attack submarines that we've bought, and now we're going to add on these missile submarines, which are bigger and more complex, and try to build them as well out of the current industrial base. That doesn't work. So that's the reason why we've shifted our plan for Lorraine. Some of you may have heard that we plan to build dry docks and an overhaul shipyard in Lorraine, and that may still happen, but it's way off into the future. The Navy's told us that it's a much higher priority to support construction with this modular manufacturing facility than it is to build new dry docks now. So the new dry docks may come, and we'll have space for them if they want them later. But what's most important to the Navy today is that we get them back on track with construction. So we're going to create thousands of jobs, both in Lorraine and Lordstown, and have a great time doing it. So I started this job in November of started this project in November of 2018 when I first learned about the sad situation of maintenance in the submarine force, and the devastating state that we were in. I frankly, I'm older than I look. I got a Medicare card. My wife tells me I'm crazy for doing this. I should just sit on the money, invest it or whatever. But I could not sit back and watch this situation persist with nobody having any solutions. And it was obvious to me that the Great Lakes offered an opportunity to solve this problem. So particularly with my experience on Gato on that last run, which was an award-winning run, but which was very, very tough and almost deadly, I could not sit back and sit on my hands. So as already was introduced, Jackie and Rod are here with me today. Our team also includes a local industrialist, Mr. Richard Burkhart, who some of you may or may not know, but he's owned 46 different metals businesses in Ohio and elsewhere, Rhode Island. And he's with us, and local material expertise, metals business expertise. And we've got a couple of retired admirals. One of them is the third successor to Admiral Rickover, who started the nuclear navy. Another one was the head of all submarine procurement for the Navy when he was on active duty. We have a couple of Navy captains. One of them was the first captain of the USS Seawolf when it was delivered. So we've got a very impressive team. If you're interested, you can see all the pictures over our website at bartlettmaritime.com. So why was I so convinced I could do this up here in the Great Lakes? Why the Great Lakes? There's a number of reasons. And I gotta tell you, unlike Jackie and Ron, I'm actually not a Cleveland native. I married a Cleveland native. My wife grew up in Thompson. I'm a New Englander. When I was in the Navy, all I wanted to do was be on a submarine home port in Connecticut so I could be quote home. And every ship I served on while I was on active duty changed home ports away from Connecticut. One of them went to San Diego. So, but I'm confirmed up here. I'm here for the long haul now. And what I've recognized, Ohio and Great Lakes have a number of very powerful advantages. First, from the economic development point of view, we've got something called Industrial Revenue Bond Program, which significantly reduces the cost of capital for our new facilities, making them more affordable for a Navy that's very constrained in its budget because it's trying to build these ships and maintain the size of the fleet. You know, as the Chinese Navy gets bigger, our Navy is getting smaller because of budget constraints. So they can't afford a whole lot, so this reduces the cost. Second reason why up here, we've suffered through the loss of steel mills, shipyards, factories, auto plants, you name it, deindustrialization, and once again China is you know, been the source of that, has impacted this area quite a bit, leaving us with a robust, you know, that's the downside of it. The upside of it is we've got a relatively robust population of skilled trades workforce up here available. Much more than we've got on the ocean coasts. Newport News just announced, was it yesterday or something, that they're going to try to hire 5,000 skilled trades people within the next year or two. Well, of that 5,000, if they hire them, they'll probably retain 1,000. As you know, the maritime business is not what you call easy. You know, shipyards are tough. It's hard work, well compensated, but hard work. And the guys and gals on the ocean coast, it was once characterized to me by a Navy executive, if you have the skills, aptitude, and interest, and you can pass the drug screen and security screen, and you're interested in shipyards, you're probably already working at one. There's not a lot of available folks there, but there are up here. So bring the people to where the work is. You know, the Great Lakes also has always been key. The Great Lakes maritime industry has always been key to the nation's economic prosperity. It's the basic industries, right? Economic prosperity is started up here. And when called upon, the Great Lakes maritime industries have also been key to the nation's national security. During World War II, 28 of the nation's 226 new submarines were actually built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. You know, we were building ships all over the place while we built new submarines in Manitowoc. Many of the rest, like the USS Cobb right down here at the end of 9th Street, had engines that were built right here in Cleveland at the old GM diesel plant. I also bet that most of you don't know that every single nuclear powered ship in the US Navy today has parts in it that were made right over here in Euclid. They all have parts from Euclid in the reactor. So you think back from the William G. Mather, right down here at the Science Center, which in order to supply the Allied forces' need for steel during World War II, led a convoy of 13 freighters in early 1941 through the ice-choked Upper Lakes to Duluth, setting a record for the first arrival in a northern port, to the new Mark W. Barker, which will be sailing this summer. The Great Lakes maritime industry has a long, storied history and a great future. There's much to celebrate here in National Maritime Day. The intersection between the Merchant Marine and the Navy. The Navy's always been up here, sometimes quietly, but it's always been up here. And the Merchant Marine has always been in direct support of both our national economic strength and of our national security when required. So congratulations to everyone here who's part of this vitally important but sadly underappreciated Great Lakes maritime industry. And I want to thank you once again for letting me be part of this great celebration. So, thanks.
Thank you, Captain Bartlett. Just on behalf of the Propeller Club, a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Love to hear you speak so highly of the Great Lakes maritime industry that we all know and love and are in it. Proud to be a part of. Thank you very much.
It's a great thing. Thank you very much.